Ordinarily, we do our business meetings on Tuesday nights during the month of May. On? Okay, well, I'm glad you have
part of the equipment to operate it.
Well, tonight we're going to devote our entire meeting to our guest, Connie Burks, and any questions you may have for her after her presentation. But you may decide to have questions during her presentation. But at first, I'd like to say a few words about our organization, Northwest Arkansas Property Rights Association. I'm the president. My name is Don Day. Vice President Ken Shasho. Could you stand up, please? And our Secretary Ken Zai. And our Treasurer Sally Ann Brown. We formed our group last fall because of what we believed could be a pending takeover of the property of our property in Benton County without any compensation, by way of an ordinance drafted by the Beaver Water District. After review by our members and protest at the meeting of the planning board, the ordinance was tabled. But there are still forces at work that are trying to get this ordinance back again, trying to work against our property rights. They don't seem to be able to come up with any logical reasons, so now they're starting to resort to name calling for our group. We're called a radical, we're called a red shirt gang, you know. So they're trying to demonize us now because they can't seem to be able to fight us on the basis of logic. So we've invited the justices and the judge to this meeting tonight in an attempt to try and educate them just what's going on as far as appropriation of property rights in this country is concerned. So with that, I'd like to introduce Justice of Peace candidate Bob Kosick, who has been involved with our group from the very beginning. So Bob will introduce our speaker tonight, Connie Burks. Bob, if you come up, please.
Thank you very much, Don. Well, I heard about Connie through Ken Sushaw, and everything I heard was great. And the more I looked, the better she looked. Connie's a great lady, and she has been instrumental in thwarting the efforts of the ADEQ, Arkansas Department of Natural Environmental Quality, the EPA, the efforts of the state of Arkansas and the state of Missouri to establish this Man and Biosphere program throughout central Arkansas, north central Arkansas, and southern Missouri. She managed to provide the information to our governor, finally got to him, and he realized how bad this was, and he directed our state agencies to stop supporting it, and we pulled out of it, and it fell through. This is strictly as a result of the energies of Connie. So rather than me waste a lot of time up here, I know Connie has a lot of stuff to cover tonight. I'd like to welcome Connie to please come up and get started with this meeting because we have a lot to learn. So you better have your pencils sharp and your notepads ready. Connie?
Thank you for this opportunity to be here tonight. I know I'm among friends when you come together to learn more about property and what we need to do to preserve it. There are so many things I could and should say, and I hope I will remember them. I'm very tired. I can tell you that we've had a long trip over here and getting this together. But anyone who's worked on issues like this for any length of time, you understand and know that it's an ongoing battle that doesn't end. But I am here to encourage you with the fact that we've had much hopeful indications and success even here in the state of Arkansas that other states and places in the nation have not enjoyed. One thing Mr. Cossack just said about that largely it was due to me about the stopping of the Biosphere Reserve. I am thankful that I was able to have a key part in that, but if I wasn't alone, I had lots of help, and I have two ladies here with me tonight that were very helpful as well. I would like to tell you more about that story because what we're fighting, even though that was 10 years ago in 1996 when that issue surfaced, and it took several weeks of intensive effort to get it. In fact, the day that I got the information from the National Park Service there in Harrison, where I now live, was, I believe, the very same day that Governor Huckabee was being inaugurated as governor. And as you recall how that happened, it was sort of an unexpected thing too. It took me about 6 weeks to finally get it to his attention. He didn't understand either exactly what was going on with the situation at that time, but he knew enough to order Game and Fish and Heritage Commission to drop their support of it or their involvement in it. And as a result of that, all of the other agencies in, you can't hear me? Okay. All of the other agencies in Missouri and some of the federal agencies throughout the nation immediately dropped it when they found out a governor was involved. As it turned out later, he, well, I won't go into that, but they came back at another angle. In fact, when he finally got the information and did what he did to stop it, he had then Senator Faye Bozeman to call me personally and convey his thanks for getting the information to him. And Senator Faye Bozeman said, now you understand they will be back at a different angle. And that's exactly what happened in 1998. The first time we basically fought it on the federal level. I was privileged to testify twice before U.S. Congress, and that's a long story as to how it even got to that point. But as a result of it being brought before the U.S. House of Congress, House of Representatives, there was a delay. Excuse me. They tabled it, the whole program, for a number of years. It never did pass the Senate completely, but they did. They came back, the Department of Interior dropped that particular program, at least by that name. But they came back through what was later called the Water Resource Management Plan through the Buffalo National River. And we, that time, fought it at the state legislative level and were successful again. But now, what we're dealing with is their Plan C, which they are coming in with. The easiest way I can say it is federal intrusion at the local level. They're coming through these watershed districts, these watershed groups that have sprung up all over the state, and they're still doing it through the same basic agencies, the state bureaucratic agencies, certain factions in those agencies. And it's such a multifaceted subject, it's impossible to describe in one short session. But that's what you're dealing with here in Benton County. And I hope to show you a little bit. We'll be projecting some transparencies there on the screen in a moment that will maybe help you understand at least the background of it. But I didn't plan to start with that, but since he brought that up, I wanted to go ahead and kind of explain that a little bit more in detail. But definitely, these particular maps that I will be referring to later, you will see that they are recent maps published by EPA and our state agencies. And there's particular information on those maps that reveal that this is actually the same battle that we're fighting, that we have been for 10 years now with this International Biosphere Reserve Program. And by and large, the whole goal of that is the abolition of property rights. And there's a number of there's so many facets to the whole subject. I will just be touching a few, but I want, first of all, to address what's happening right now to you here in Benton County. And I will start with that in just a minute, Mary, if you would like to be getting, we've never done this before, so she's, bless her heart, she's really going to have to play it by ear just to know what to do, but we'll start with this water quality summary report, if you'd like to put that up now. I would like to give you just a bit of information. When I hear someone speak, especially when I'm going to be mentioning some of the things that I mentioned, I like to know a little bit about the speaker, so I would like to tell you that I'm nothing professional whatsoever. I did not plan to get into this battle that I've been working on now for 10 years. It just so happens that I'm one of those that once I start something, I don't like to quit until it's finished. And that's why I have now been before our state legislature numerous times and before the PCE Commission and other groups in Little Rock. And we just keep, we have been described as what's called a ragtag army. And it's people that help me and work with me in this are people that we weren't even acquainted before. But there are people all over this state and nation, many of them actually. You're in good company, let me tell you, in doing what you have done in organizing this, because there are many, many people who see and understand the danger that is creeping in, that has crept into our nation. The Communist Manifesto, thank you. I believe, well, I'm not sure that, anyway, there are three basic planks to taking down America, and that was to destroy the family and free enterprise and industry and property rights. Those are their three basic things. And we see how all three of those things are so advanced as to being destroyed in this nation. But it's interesting, there's more than just property rights, just the philosophy of it. There's more to the reason of it than that. The reason that I am continuing in the fight. What I do see happening, there are many places in America, I believe that it's too late, that they have just gone too far down the road that I will be describing in more detail later. But it seems like that here in Arkansas, it's coming to a head in this state. And I believe that because of our geographical location and because of so many people being in this state that still understand what freedom is all about, and that without property and the right to own your own property, you have no other freedom. No other freedom means anything. The right to worship God, the right to educate, health care, business, enterprise, all of those things. If you cannot own your own property, it doesn't matter if your owner of your property tells you you have freedom to do these things. At any point, that owner, being the government, can yank those freedoms away from us. So it's so important to understand that property is the foundational basis of all freedom. And we understand that from the Bible itself, upon which the laws of this nation have definitely been based, even though we hear so much about that, against that. It is true, and it cannot be denied. And the more people understand that and accept that, then the sooner and better that we can restore. And I believe that here in Arkansas, that there is, we have made great advances, and there are so many people across this state who have just sort of individually raised up to fight the different battles that need to be fought from whatever force this is that is trying to destroy our freedom in this nation. What I started to say, most of us, you will notice, are above 50 that are fighting these kinds of battles, and there's a reason for that. It's because our children have not been educated in recent years about the truth of our heritage. And many things that are taught in the public forum today leave out very, very basic truths. And it's only the above 40 and 50 age group that understands these things and how critical they are to our vanishing freedoms and to restoring them. I am a pastor's wife. My husband, Lonnie, is not here tonight. We have 3 children, 2 grown sons and a daughter still at home. And my husband has pastored now in Harrison for about 13 years, and he is also an evangelist. He has traveled extensively throughout several of the United States, and he preaches in lots of places, and I accompany him a lot as well. It was interesting. It was because he was preaching in the Smoky Mountain area. is how I first found out about this international biosphere reserve program. We saw it, they had just erected the signs when we were visiting there, and that's how I found out about it, and I was so disturbed by it. I came home and began to ask questions and wonder, what if they tried to do that here? And as when I called the National Park Service, they told me that it would be 6 weeks until there would be, it was their target date for the very same thing to happen here. And so after that, it's when I began researching it and contacting elected officials and other people who helped bring it to a stop, a halt, at least temporarily here in Arkansas. But like I said, they have been proceeding just through other ways. I was very pleased to hear Mr. Cossack and someone else mentioned it, that the watershed ordinance that has been plaguing you folks here in Benton County for some time, they have recently acknowledged that it's dead. That's very interesting. That means you guys are being much more successful than you realize, even though you may be being scorned or turned aside and called radicals. Get used to it. But when they do that, you know you're being effective. Just remember that. But they also said that they are, what they do, they just come back with, if one thing doesn't work, they come back with something else. And Mr. Cossack was just explaining to me a little bit about what he had been told. And I will be, after I think about it some more and discuss it with some other people, we may have more advice as to what you might do to help deflect that as well. It is entirely possible. The main thing is just keep doing what you're doing and keep standing for the right and the truth and knowing it. It's important and it is effective and it's working. At the conclusion of my part of it tonight, I have several handouts down there on the step in front of me, and one of them is ways to protect or restore integrity of property rights in our state and nation. And I have listed 12 things here, and hopefully that will help you be able to understand. If I don't make things very clear tonight, that will give you a little bit more. And you know, no one can do all 12 of those things, I understand, but what I urge you to do is to look at those 12 different things, and the ones that you can do, really begin to work on that particular thing. Well, I started to say some of the things, but I think I'll go back to this other thing first before I discuss any more of those at this point. To show you what is, where the background of your watershed ordinance that your quorum court passed, where it came from. That's what I'd like to show you first. How many of you have heard of the Upper White River Basin Foundation? Okay, 2 or 3. Okay, that is a group of volunteers. Okay, that's always what they call themselves, and they have big money behind them, and they have all of these real wonderful sounding agendas. You know, clean water, clean water. Everybody wants clean water. That's so important. But what these groups are doing, they are put together by nonprofit foundations. Okay, that's what's behind them. Therefore, they have learned how to write grants to get federal money to accomplish their agendas. But behind the scenes, working very closely with them, are our bureaucratic agencies, specifically ADEQ and ANRC, which used to be called Soil and Water, also Game and Fish and various others as well. I have followed these issues for many years and have been working to learn and understand more about what's going on behind the scenes, but all of a sudden these summits begin to be being scheduled. And after the Oklahoma-Arkansas issue came about, then we started hearing, well, we're going to have to do something to keep that from happening with Missouri. First of all, I firmly believe that those are set up situations to begin with, all of those matters. It's very important that you understand that most of the things that people get accused of are not based on sound science or credible data. And that's one of the things that we need to correct through our state legislature. I'll discuss more about that later. But this is the summit report. You'll see the date on it, March 29th and 30th of 2005. It was held in, was this one the one in Eureka Springs? Yes, okay. I believe it was the first summit that they held. Okay, On that, you will see Beaver Lake Watershed Partnership is there as one of the sponsors. One of the reasons that I got so interested in this, the Kings River Watershed Partnership, is what led me to know about all of this, because before my dad passed away, he bought property on Kings River and he left it to us children. And we have a family get-together place over there, and it's very dear to us. And Kings River is what's called an ERW, designated river water body. So that's one reason I was so involved in all of this, and I hadn't really paid that much attention to the other groups listed there until back in November, or October I suppose it was, I had received these maps from EPA. And these maps, these are my words, okay, but I can assure you from other information that I have, they were really not supposed to have been made for the public to see or for our elected officials to see. These were made for the benefit and the purposes of the bureaucratic agencies and their agendas. But I was speaking with a gentleman in EPA that I had gotten documents from before, and he happened to mention that he'd just gotten his ecoregion map of Arkansas in. And I said, I'd be interested in seeing it. He said, would you? And so 2 or 3 days later, this large mailing chute came to my home, and it come all the way from Corvallis, Oregon, where this map was put together. And as a result of that, and some of the things which I'll be discussing later on these maps, I took them before the PCE Commission and revealed to them what the agencies were up to, and then I took it before a legislative subcommittee and revealed to them what they were up to. It's real interesting because these two are the same map, actually. This is a pretty rare map because once I revealed to the Commission and the legislative subcommittee some of the wording on this, they decided to republish the map and they changed the wording. That's the only thing different in these two maps besides the size. Right up there in the highlighted section you will see, I'll talk more about the wording on that later. But I had gotten also an appointment with the governor's, two of his chief policy advisors to discuss this with them as well in late October. And that's the night before I went there to meet with these policy advisors of the governor's. There was a newspaper article that came out, and it had to do with your watershed district and the watershed ordinance that was passed and was so controversial. But that's what led me to know more and understand more about what's going on here in Benton County. And actually, I think you guys are probably the most targeted watershed at this point that they are trying to accomplish their agendas through. And the fact that you have risen up and opposed it, you cannot understand how wonderful that is and what a blow you have dealt to these people with their agendas. On page 7, you will see here the date, March of 2005, and Beaver Lake Watershed District being one of the, that's okay, go right ahead and put on at the next on page 7, please, of this report. It's several pages, this final report that they put together. And you will see in March when they published this report of that summit, if you will look down on number 2 of these final consensus statements that this summit came to the agreement of, on number 2 it says that they were to encourage uniform baseline city and county land use standards throughout the watershed for watershed and ecosystem protection. And then look at D. One of the points they were doing there, they were going to lobby for adoption of ordinances which incorporate the recommendations. Okay? So the recommendations of these environmentalist summits that they are holding with these nonprofit groups. Now understand, these nonprofit groups, if they are allowed to continue with their programs and their agendas, it will totally circumvent our county and local governments and the state government as well, because their eventual goal is to take away, to dissolve county and state boundaries and to divide our nation up into ecoregions and bioregions, as they call them. And from there they set up bioregional councils, which are unelected people, unelected officials who will be making the rules and regs for us. And we eventually lose all of our ability to have any say in our government, which This is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Is how it was established in this nation. And I believe will remain so here in this state, because God is raising up lots of people to affect and to accomplish those very things. And I am so encouraged. There are so many, many people that are working on things like this in various places and in various ways as well. But you will see here where it says to lobby for adoption of ordinances which incorporate the recommendations. Okay, go ahead and put the next one up, which is that newspaper article that came out just the day before I went to the governor's office. I'm sure many of you will remember this newspaper article as well. You may not be able to get it all up there. In fact, it's not even all on the transparency. But there was one very heartening statement in that that really encouraged me. It was just a blessing that there were people who opposed it and saw the dangers when they started talking about the buffer zones and so on and so forth. Because if you had seen all the other literature, you understand that at first they say, well, we will allow this and this and this, but as time goes on, they disallow more and more things in the buffer zones, and people get moved farther and farther back from this and that. And basically all that's happening is people are just being moved away from any kind of rural living and into isolated urban settings where they're more easily controlled. That's what that amounts to. And they have this reverence for the land, but not the land to be used, but rather for it just to be set aside and not used, and it just goes to nothing. Such as, for instance, in the Buffalo River area, back in 1972 when they made that a national river. 3 years later they came back with the Wilderness Act after they said that no one would have to move in 72 when they made the designation. 3 years later they came back with the Wilderness Act, and therefore everyone a mile on either side of the river had to leave. And I mean, it's horrific, some of the stories you hear, because we live in that area. We own property in that area, the Newton County area. That's where our home is. But some of the stories that we have heard, because we didn't move there until in the 90s, but there was such anger still there because of what happened. And even though I had grown up in the Fayetteville area, I had not heard of any of those things happening when they were going on, because the news media does not tell all of these things. But they give lots of space to these people who have such agendas to move people off the land. So that's another thing we have to deal with, is getting the truth out there, and it doesn't happen through our regular news media. But on this, in this particular thing, let's see this thing, you can see right there where the underline is, this was the Washington County judge said that he thinks that watershed protection is needed, but he isn't certain how a watershed ordinance will be received. He says that even everyone understands that you want to keep your water clean, but he said it's just a matter of how you go about it. Bingo. That's exactly the point. You know, people like you want clean water. We all want clean water. We're the people that have kept the waters as clean as they are. That's why we have so many ERWs in this state. We have so many pristine waters, because the agriculture people, the people of the state of Arkansas, have been good stewards of the land and of the water for many, many years. And I know, and we all know, as development increases and so on and so forth, you know, there are situations that have to be dealt with. But we don't need new situations to deal with these things. Our wonderful, wonderful constitutions have already made that possible, and it can be done right if it is continued, if it's done in the right manner. But what's been happening over the years, the proper channels of government, especially with regard to conservation and environmental concerns, those proper channels have been being pushed into the background and have been being neutralized, and by the very agencies that are instead promoting themselves and usurping more and more of power and ability to put rules and regulations upon us that do not belong there, and that they did not actually get in place properly. See, we have to, you know, we know when there are rules posted on the highways or wherever, we have to abide by them. If we do not, then we get arrested and we pay the consequences. The beautiful part of the American system is our government officials, they also have to abide by the law, even more so, according to different things, at least they're supposed to, but that's not what's been happening. So after we fought this battle of the International Biosphere Reserve back in '96, we came to, I began doing all kinds of research, and the Freedom of Information Act. How many of you are familiar with that? Great. How many of you have ever exercised it? Okay, there's a few of you. Actually, I brought some of the latest publications of the Freedom of Information booklet. I'm going to be giving you a phone number later if you don't have one of these. All you have to do is call the Attorney General's office. It'll be in your mailbox the next day, usually, and you can order as many as you want. Okay, it's very important. This is the most important thing because the reason we've had as much success as we have had in this state in stopping the things that we have stopped in the last few years is because of that law and because of all the things we have, documents that we got our hands on. And many times we had to go the second step. We didn't just contact these agencies and say we want these documents because they don't like to give them to you many times. They don't want you to see them. You even have the right to go to their offices and inspect their files. And we've done that. And I can tell you they don't like it. But all you have to do then is call the governor's office. And they will help you. They will call the agency and say, hey, wait a minute, why aren't you giving these documents to them? Sometimes we inform the legislature, but the governor's office, because these are executive branch agencies, the governor's office will generally help us out on that. They will at least contact the agencies, and they don't like to have their under the cover activities exposed very well. But believe you me, it's our duty to do it, okay? It's not because we're mean, but we are working to preserve what our forefathers died for. How can we do less? So we are blessed to have this freedom of information law in this state and nation, but it must be used or it's not much good to us. Let's see, where was I going with that? Okay, with the Freedom of Information booklet, handbook, you can read that and learn how to do it. It's very important to know that. But when we found out then what was behind the International Biosphere Reserve, in one of their documents that we got, there was just one little sentence that said that it was the ERW designation that the state had made that gave the federal agency the right to pursue the management plans that they were trying to impose on the entire watershed of the Buffalo River, which was parts of 9 counties, a huge area. Well, when I saw that, I thought, well, let's find out what that is. So I began researching the ERW designation. That's where things in the state really started going downhill. It was back in the 80s that between 83 and 87 when this was being developed and set up, and then in 1987 is when the Pollution Control and Ecology Commission adopted a new way to address water quality in the state. Prior to that, they had been using what's called the AA. They just had labeled the streams and things as AA and A and AAA, AA, and A, I believe is what it was, according to the benefit of the stream and the cleanliness of the stream. But with one stroke of the pen, now those are words that came out of some documents and some people at the time that they were doing that. So with one stroke of the pen, they totally changed it to what's called an ecoregion agenda. And at that time, I have it here with some papers I have if you'd like to see it later. They by law are required to notify the public via newspapers or however, when they make a major rule change of any sort. Well, it's always in the classified section of the Democrat Gazette and maybe a few other papers here and there. But this particular one was only that one paper. It's a long, small print article in the classified section. And at that time, they named, I think, 16% of the, I don't know if it was the full 16% at that time, but a large amount of the streams in our state and water bodies as extraordinary resource waters. And they just did it, and they weren't even named in this article. They just said they were doing some of them. And they did not list them, so no one knew to oppose it. They didn't know what the meaning of it was. It was many years later. That was in 87 when that was adopted. It was in 96 and 97, 96 when we stopped the Biosphere Reserve thing, and it was in 97, 98, then when I began to research this extraordinary resource water that no one had heard of, no one knew what it meant. But the first time I went before the state legislature, they had to ask, what is that? What does it stand for? The legislature did not know. No one knew. It is really encouraging to me to, after 10 years basically of working on this issue, now ERW many times is making the headlines today, and the word watershed. I had a state legislator ask me one time, exactly what is watershed? What does it mean? We see these are bureaucratic terms that they have assigned to confuse the public for one thing, and it just takes diligent effort to be able to even understand what they're doing. But the good thing that we found is they didn't follow the rules when they made these designations. First of all, they did not give adequate public notification, which they are required by law to do. Second of all, they did not do the required, federally required economic impact analysis. In other words, before they can bring a new rule into being that the public has to follow, they have to perform economic and environmental benefit analysis to show if it's going to have an impact. If the impact is going to be overly negate the benefit that would occur from the new rule or regulation. Guess what? They didn't do it, any of those. So back in '98, I believe it was, when I first began to learn all this, I wrote a letter to the governor and said, these things are invalid. All you need to do is strike them off the books. Well, you know, that's real naive, I'm sure. But at the same point, it began to get attention. Of course, the governor's not going to do something like that. These are his agencies, and by then, they were so intertwined with federal grant money that they'd already, excuse me, gotten and spent, I'm sure. This is my analysis of the situation, okay? But, I mean, this began to cause a lot of consternation in our agencies when people from the public began demanding that the ERW designations be stricken from the books because we're contending that it's invalid. Well, recently there has come to the surface, it's a petition before the PC&E Commission now over this very issue of the ERW designation because they are refusing to allow a water supply or at least a dam to be built. There is no process even in the law by which someone, the public, can be able to use an ERW stream for a necessary water supply if necessary. That's sort of a loose explanation of the situation, but that's what's making headlines down in the Van Buren area at this time. So we're just thankful that that's come to the forefront of the news because it just underscores what the points we've been trying to make all these years. So, and then I've been told that you keep hearing that people want to make Beaver Lake an ERW too. Fight it and fight it and fight it. You don't want that to happen. You also, this other direction that they are coming at now with trying to do, even though they say the ordinance is dead, there may be some other way that they're planning to do something. And in fact, they have said that. And you'll need to investigate that. And some of these things, hopefully, that I have suggested on this sheet will be able to help you know how to fight that, how's the best way to fight that. To do it successfully, we must re-educate, reacquaint, and resupply our locally elected conservation district boards with the authority that they have historically and statutorily possessed, making sure they utilize all the tools available to them to maintain sensible water quality, as opposed to what is really happening and what's been going on. How many of you in here know anything about your conservation district boards, your locally elected ones? Okay, neither did I until the day before I went to the governor's office that I told you about last November. When they called and told me that I could come, I thought, okay, now I've got all of this information to show the governor what's going wrong and why it won't, how it's doing, how it's destroying our property rights, basically. But you need to have a remedy to offer when you show that there's something wrong. So I began to consider various things, and to make a long story short, I contacted an attorney friend of mine in Wyoming. Karen Budfallon is her name. Several years ago, when the Biosphere Project was being debated in this state a lot, she made a visit to this state and spoke at a meeting in Harrison to several hundred people at that time. She has fought these matters all over the nation for years. She's very qualified to do what she's doing. She and her husband are both in an attorney firm there. And I asked her, I said, Karen, would it be possible for me to suggest, or would it be appropriate for me to suggest that the locally elected conservation district boards should be the ones to handle these matters? Therefore, the people have a direct voice in what happens to them. And she said, that's exactly what needs to happen. We've been doing that here in Wyoming for 10 years. It's worked very well. For 10 years before, and even after that, when Arkansas agencies went down the wrong path with the ERWs and the ecoregion agenda, it was happening all over the nation. The only state that withstood it, because they were getting pressure from EPA to do it. See, EPA does, under the Clean Water Act, is what gives our agencies the authority to govern these environmental matters with water. I think most people understand that. However, the Clean Water Act basically can only require fishable, swimmable standards in our state's streams and waters. Okay? That's an easy, all of our streams, many of our streams are far beyond that. They meet other standards as well. Those are the ones that are labeled ERW now. But EPA cannot force the states to do this. But if they can convince or persuade our state agencies to voluntarily designate certain water bodies to a higher level than the fishable, swimmable, then if our states voluntarily agree to do this, then we are bound by those agreements, those contracts that they make with the federal agency, EPA. And so many times they do that in order to get grant money. Okay, that's what has happened through the years. Well, that some people don't see the danger in that. And yet if you will look and see in our state, especially in the last few years, you never pick up a newspaper that you don't read of another federal grant that has come, especially in the poor counties over in our area where we're from. It's just constant. Every weekly little newspaper, every week, there's a new grant that some volunteer group has managed to get from EP or from the federal government. But in 1942, Mary, if you could find that about the 1942 U.S. Supreme Court decision, you might come up with that in a minute. But in 1942, there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says what the federal government has the right to regulate that which it finances. So you see, once they get their foot in the door, if our state agencies volunteer us to a higher than necessary standard on these rivers and water bodies, then when the federal government then gives them money to develop programs regarding that, then they gain the right and a foothold in the door to come in on the local level even and regulate us. And that's what's been happening. And that's the danger of this, because our federal government, EPA, there is a faction in it that has led us down this road of ecoregion and environmental watershed approaches to water quality. And that was developed by radical environmentalists who want to move the people away from the rivers and streams and put us in isolated population islands. So we have all kinds of information to be able to read about those things, and I won't go any further with that, but that's to give you an idea that that's that's happening. So that's why the danger is there. Also, there is a newspaper article that just came out very recently that showed how that Arkansas is 12th on the list, I believe. It said, this was in the Democrat Gazette on March 16th of this year, state takes more than it gives to the U.S., and it talks about how that Arkansas receives more federal dollars than it pays in federal taxes. And there are a number of states that do that. I have a few of these extra copies for someone who'd like to read those later. You're welcome to take them to understand more about the dangers that is happening with this. And, they do it for education, they do it for health, they do it. There's constantly some kind of a they teach small nonprofit groups, even these little stream teams and so on and so forth, how to get federal dollars, how to write grants. It's a big thing. They even have grant writing seminars now. But see, it's bringing in federal dollars to our state without going through our local elected officials, or even our state officials. It's not going through elected officials. There's great, great danger in that. And people have not realized that. And so that's one thing that you can do is, talk to your elected officials about it and, try to wean our state off of this particular kind of a problem, because that's where there's going to be lots of more, that's how they get a stranglehold on us. When I presented this, what Wyoming did, Wyoming stayed apart. All the rest of the nation went down this road of the Clean Water Action Plan that had been developed and put forward by Al Gore. But when that began to be seen, Wyoming was the one state that stood against it, and it just so happens that we knew Ms. Bud Fallon there in Wyoming. And so the day that I called her, she said, it's interesting, after 10 years, she said, we have a litigation matter about that very thing. She said, I'm sitting here right now writing. I had to go back and get the information for how we set this up. She said, it's 4 pages long. I'll fax it to you, I'll mail it to you, and you can have it with you when you go to. She said it works perfectly. It's a non-point source program. So she sent it to me, and I had it then to submit to the governor. In fact, actually, I handed it to him personally when he was in Harrison a few days before I went there to meet with his policy advisors. This is, Mary, if you wouldn't care to put up the flow chart at this point. First of all, putting this one up if you don't care, the big one.
This one? Well, you can't tell.
I can't. Yes, that's it. Okay. I don't know if that will all fit on there or not. I guess it won't. Okay. This, I have a few copies of this too if you'd like to take it and study it. This is what's presently happening. This is the way it's happening. This is the present strategy of EPA collaboration with the Arkansas state agencies to impose EPA eco-regional watershed policy, which is based upon evolving consensus actions of a few volunteers, such as watershed partnerships and your Beaver Lake Watershed District, who they among themselves agree upon blanket rules and regulations to which everyone may be subjected via federal contracts, these federal monies coming in. In other words, it's federal intrusion at the local level because it eventually circumvents state, county, and municipal governments. And that's what's happening to you. If this watershed district is able to start making the rules and passing, convincing your quorum court to pass things that are favorable to their existence, then that's what's happening. This shows basically how that people elect representatives who composed the Clean Water Act back in 1972. And the arrows going off to the side, the people also elect our governor and the state legislature. And then the arrows pointing down, the governor is over state agencies. They are executive branch agency. He appoints the officers of these agencies, and they are supposed to be answering to him. Furthermore, they have to, anything they do, it has to go before legislative review. Well, I found out several years ago that, and these are my words, but that's basically a joke, okay? Because I've been there and I've seen it happen. These bureaucratic agencies, they just write myriads of rules and regulations. They take them before these subcommittees, and they have this little procedure that they go through in a form. I actually, through Freedom of Information, at one time we were inspecting files, we came up with a letter that was one of the state legislative subcommittees who had to approve some of the rules and regulations that the bureaucratic agencies were trying to impose. They just forfeited their right to review because they were, I guess, too busy with other things. And I had that in a letter, actually. That was back several years ago. But what I observed happening there, even though I was there sometimes when these bureaucratic agencies would come before the legislature or the subcommittee with new rules and regs, they just basically just gave them a rubber stamp approval without investigating it. And that happens very routinely. And it's not entirely the fault of our legislators. When you think about it, in the last session, the 2005 session, how many, it was over 2,000 bills that had to be considered in that short amount of time. And remember, most of our legislators are not full-time. They have other jobs and things like that. They are being purposely inundated with these bureaucratic agencies making myriads of rules and regulations, and they do not have time to truly investigate all of it. That's something that needs to change. Groups like this need to work with attorneys to prepare legislation. One thing I think is so important that no bill should be able to be voted upon unless everyone has had time to read it and reflect upon it. There is no sense in 2,000 new laws being gone through that every time they have a session, because most of it is fluff anyway. It just comes down to, but because they just so overpower them and overwhelm them with all of this legislative rulemaking, that's how these bad statutes get passed on through without knowing the light of day until later they come knocking on our door enforcing them. But anyway, back to this part, the state agencies over here on the left, it says are tasked with composing rules and regs to address pollution and to maintain the Clean Water Act water quality requirements. The legislature over here on the other side, state agencies, submit rules and regs to legislative review and approval before enforcement upon the landowners and voters, okay? But what's happened here in the middle, EPA, without legislative authority, has administratively adopted an unauthorized ecoregional watershed policy then provides grant monies to state agencies for multitudes of environmental programs in exchange for state agencies' agreements to volunteer people of Arkansas to comply with levels of water quality that exceed the Clean Water Act requirements, such as the ERWs, the TMDLs, the CAFOs, the AFOs, so on and so forth, as they are implemented on non-point source private property through watershed partnerships, which ultimately answer to unelected, consensus-oriented authorities, also known as bureaucratic watershed bioregional councils, etc. These entities basically ignore our historic representative government and constitutionally mandated state boundaries, county lines, and jurisdictional districts. But remember, policy is not law. However, most people don't know that, and they think that just because these bureaucratic agencies have a policy that they have to comply with it. But many times, their policies have not been properly, lawfully instituted. So that's where, if people will do our duties in investigating these things and say, where is your authority to require this? That's when and how we can become effective. If you want to put the other one up now. Oh, this one? Well, it was
the only flow chart I knew.
Okay. Okay, well, this is the one I've got several copies of to be able to hand out for you to take home. It's the most important one. This is the way to change all of these things and to get the conservation district, locally elected ones, reauthorized. They're already authorized. They just have been being pushed into the background for so long that the state agencies have just been pushing their way through to these things and setting up these watershed groups and districts. This will be the most helpful thing for you to study this and understand where to go from there. If you can get attorneys to study some of the other information that I have, because this information has been going around the state. Is anyone in here connected with Farm Bureau? Okay, that actually, we got this to the floor of the State Convention of Farm Bureau just the morning actually that it convened last year, and it was too late to actually get it adopted as policy. Already, someone else had gotten there to Farm Bureau and convinced them to adopt this watershed approach. But they went ahead and voted on it, but this was passed around, and as a result, many people have been asking questions in Farm Bureau. What needs to happen now is we are working on putting together policies for the next state convention coming up of Farm Bureau. You need to get in touch with your local Farm Bureau boards, and that's how the Farm Bureau process works. And get this changed in the upcoming their next policy adopting convention, which will be in November. I have that listed in there as things to do as well. And we will be putting together a package of information how to do that. But it's critical that each county go to their local farm bureaus and get them to take this message to the state convention. There's already a lot of support for it. It's just a matter of getting the legwork done at this point. But this is to adopt the Wyoming example of the approach to local management of watershed and non-point source pollution in Arkansas. If we can get this implemented throughout our state, it will take care of all of these other problems. Of course, it's not going to happen overnight, and it doesn't happen instantly, but it can. This is the answer to the problems. I've talked with a number of people in authoritative positions and people who know what they're talking about in legal arenas as well. But it's a matter of re-educating the people of our state. And to think of it, in 1937, Arkansas was the first state in the nation to adopt a conservation district law. And it came from Washington telling the states how to do it. And we happened to be, our legislature was in session at the time, so they were the very first that had the honor of passing this. And it has evolved down through the years, but in the late, I believe it's in the 60s, is when it began to, the state agency, Soil and Water, began to, they claim that they are an outgrowth of that conservation district board. And that, but see, they are appointed, and over the time, they now take it, they're the ones who educate. Once a conservation district gets elected, an officer gets elected, they train him. And the whole thing is just turned upside down. Rather than the local people, the local elected officers of these conservation district boards being the ones in control, they're more or less just riding in the wagon and doing what they're told. And I won't go any farther with that now, but this is what you've got to start studying and searching out here in your county and find out who this is. How many of you even knew that there was, every 3 years, there is an election of your conservation district officers, and only landowners are allowed to vote in it. I did some research on this. It's real interesting because, see, I'd never heard of it before either. It's been, and I talked with the gentleman in the Attorney General's office, an attorney there, and he didn't even know that this entity existed. He said, as I began showing him things, and he was pulling it up on his computer while we were talking on the phone, he said, this is incredible. He said, this has been flying under radar all these years. So that's how desperate they've been to suppress this information of this entity. This is brought to, it's already got the authoritative, legislatively sanctioned power to take the lead in all of these non-point source matters. And that's exactly what they've done in Wyoming. We already have the legal framework, how it was done there. We just need people who have contact with other attorneys and people like that to begin to push it here in this state, as well as our legislators and various other situations. And I will tell you, the agencies themselves are not happy about this information that is now circulating around the state. The Wyoming example is not news that they want to hear about, okay? But that's the answer to all of our problems. Well, I shouldn't say all of our problems, but for these watershed districts, it will put them out of business. It will put them back in the back seat and where our elected officials will be. But what I started to say when I began checking this out on the, let's see, I checked in 3 different counties. I got the numbers for it. They have rotating elections. Every year there are elections. See, we have 75 counties in Arkansas. And so every 3rd year, each county has an election for their conservation district officers. So they stagger it with all the different counties. So some years, some counties have elections and some years others do. Well, anyway, I checked with Madison County and with Boone County, I think, and Mary checked with Fulton County, where she's from. But, and I'll have to, don't hold me to these numbers exactly, but you'll just see the point that I'm trying to make here. In Madison County, what I was told, that I asked how many landowners are there in that county, and they gave me a rough estimate. They said about 22,000, 22 to 23,000. I said, okay, now I want to know. Then I got that from the courthouse, that information, 22,000 landowners, mind you, okay? So then I checked with the NRCS office where the county conservation district boards are located within these federal agencies. And I said, how many people voted in the last election for these conservation district officers? Guess what? In this county where they had approximately 22,000 landowners, there have been 89 people who voted. That's how suppressed this information is, okay? In Newton County or Fulton County, do you remember the numbers there?
20 people voted in Fulton County. 20 people.
20.
Out of 29,000.
Okay, there you have it there. So you see how this whole concept of locally elected people being in charge of the rules and regs that we have to come to, we have to obey regarding our backyards, what we do with our garbage, what we do with our septic systems, what we do with, our fertilizers, all of these things that definitely directly impact us should be being handled by people that we can elect or unelect, okay? That way, we're still in control. We the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people. But it's been being so usurped, their authority of these, that people don't even know they exist. I mean, I've run into this in every single county. So that's the next thing, one of the things you need to do when you go from this meeting tonight. Where you will find them, look in your phone books, in the NRCS office, okay? NRCS stands for...
Natural Resources Conservation.
NRCS.
Yeah.
RCS.
Okay. NRCS, yes, okay. They're the federal agents, okay, that are present in our counties who are working hand in glove with our agencies and who are putting together these watershed districts, okay, and these watershed partnerships. They're the people who are just intertwining all of this together. And the locally elected guys, the conservation district, the county ones, they have just been being blended. I had a state senator use that word when he was explaining it to me. So they've just been being blended. I talked to a lady in the Boone County NRCS office who works on the county level of it. And she said, I've been working here, I was asking all these questions the day after I talked to Ms. Bud Fallon, the attorney in Wyoming, and I started investigating exactly what was going on in my county where I'm now living. And and she told me, she said, I've worked here 10 years, and she said, I still can't tell you what I'm doing. They change it so constantly and so subtly. They've just been blending the federal agents in these offices with the duties and the responsibilities of the county elected agents, that the county agents themselves are just basically into the background. And if you run into more, I can give you privately, aside from this tonight, I will give you more information about who to contact and things like that. There are still some county agents who understand what's going on, but I had one of them to tell me, look, when we started talking about your Wyoming plan, using that here in Arkansas to restore the way it should be, they now have such power over our county agents. He said, I could lose my job over this. Some of them have gotten, are actually paid. They have gotten paid positions to do technical work and things like that. Most of the elected county conservation district officers are just farmers and people like that just show up and have meetings, and they just kind of go along with what the federal agents tell them to do. But that's kind of an oversimplification of the process. But to give you an idea of what's going on, so there are many conservation district officers, the locally elected ones, the county ones, who are very interested in this because they see the power of it, the truth of it, and how it could remedy these problems that you guys are fighting and very concerned about at this time. So be sure, I believe I made 50 copies of this. I'm sorry, I did make a flow chart of it, but I've lost it somewhere. It's not Mary's fault, it's mine. Be sure and get one of these before you leave, okay? And you can duplicate it and just take it from there and get a better understanding of it. And then, get this information everywhere you can get it. To every elected officer that you can. You must get a hold of your state legislators and hold their feet to the fire. Say, where do you stand on this? You've got to, we want to know you're going to do right when you get to the legislature with it. Your JPs, the ones who are being elected. The main thing, too, is, door-to-door canvassing your neighborhoods, to get, like this gentleman here that's running for office of the JP. You need to work hard to get at least one voice on your quorum court. Believe you me, they don't want that to happen, but it can happen. So don't give up easily, no matter how discouraging it looks. It's very important to do that, and then be present. He told me that many of you show up at every one of these quorum court meetings. Keep on doing that. And you hold their feet to the fire and ask questions. And there are people who can advise you and give you more information. But just insist on getting your conservation district boards established, I guess you could say. I'm not sure if I brought, but I can get this to you, Mary, if you'd like to put one of these up now. Bobby Frank's, the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. This is how bad they oppose that particular plan, okay? This is how frightened they are of it. Miss Bud Fallon in Wyoming gave me the name of a lady who was basically responsible. She understood the impact and the dangers of all of this Clean Water Action Plan that, like I said, all of the other states in the nation went for except Wyoming. Miss Bud Fallon put me in touch with her. She was going to fly down here and speak at a gathering there in Harrison to explain how this can work in Arkansas. When a particular board in Little Rock heard about it, they were so excited about that time, they asked me to come and speak to their board and offer to let Miss Bobby Franks come and speak to this board in Little Rock when she was here in Arkansas, when we were hosting her there in Harrison, to explain how this can work. Well, they invited me to come. The president of the board did. But by the time I got there, in fact, before I got there, the agency, and I know who in the agency, it was the director of the agency because it was told to me, got to them and said, don't let that happen, basically. So by the time I got there to make the presentation, they were very angry and they were not kind at all. Mary was there with me. And they refused to let this woman come to our state. What happened to freedom, right to assemble peaceably, freedom of speech? They said, do not let her come. That was, in fact, they got in touch with her superiors in Washington and in Wyoming. and made it so hard she had to not even come to our local meeting there in Harrison. That's how serious they are. That's how afraid of this that they are, okay? But it turned out, it worked out much better. She's not a woman who sits, takes things like that quietly. Thanks to her, that this information is still available in this nation even. So what she did, their legislative session was fixing to start there in Wyoming, and she was so swamped with that, and then they were started. She said, Connie, if I come, she said, it will compromise what I'm trying to get accomplished here in our state legislature. And so I said, forget it. It's not, we don't want that to happen because you're fighting battles there as well, and we'll just wait and see what happens. But here's what she did. She took the time, she put together 5 pages of information that explained what she would have explained had she come. It's much more effective because we have canvassed the state. We have gotten this to every person who, and believe you me, they have circulated it themselves. So this is very, very good information to help you understand that. And I have one copy I can leave with you, and then I would love for all of you to make copies for yourselves.
I have a copy too, Connie.
Okay. So get that distributed among yourselves. That way you will understand how this procedure can work in our state, okay? She describes that very well. What was interesting then, one person who was on that board in Little Rock who did a flip-flop and refused then to let this Miss Franks come from Wyoming, or even for us to invite her to come. One of the person who was just sitting on the board told me later of a conversation that he had with the director of this state agency who was so opposed to her coming. And the director had been trying to convince him of a new program, whereas we were calling this the Wyoming plan that we want. I had just gotten this information in late October, early November, just before I went to the governor's office to present it there. What I didn't know, at the same time, this agency had been planning, and we have I got this by Freedom of Information later when I was told that it existed. It's a 4-page document, and they were just at the very same time, simultaneously, as we were getting this Wyoming information, planning to convince all of our 75 county conservation districts in the state, there's one in each county, okay, to go with what I have now named as the Nebraska plan. Nebraska, what they did years ago, they had 95 counties there, and they condensed their 95 county districts into 23 districts. They combined them, okay? So what that means is now their county elected officials, they still have their officers elected by the landowners, but now instead of having a local county office in with the federal agents like we do here in Arkansas, they have so combined them that they have as many as now as 23 of their counties combined to make one NRD, they call it, Natural Resource District. Our particular Soil and Water Agency had already taken the steps to rename themselves as the Natural Resource Commission. Do you see how that they're just setting themselves up? Okay, they'd already done that in the last legislative session. Now they were just fixing to start with this program to convince our local county districts to combine, so that, for instance, if they can manage to combine 12 counties, in 12 counties there would only be one office, and it would be called a natural resource district. It would be a regional office. Suppose 12 counties in northwest Arkansas combined all of their county conservation districts into one, they would only have one office. So if they put it here in Rogers, so to speak, then 3 or 4 counties away, they would not be able to go directly to their conservation district officers directly. They'd have to travel 3 or 4 counties to get to that regional office. However, in Nebraska, what they did, they went ahead and left all the federal agents in each of the local counties. So I asked them, I talked to the gentleman there in Nebraska at length because he described all of this to me, and I said, Mr. Bishop, could you tell me, now when a landowner has a need, a farmer or something, to get conservation district help with his land, with programs or whatever, does he go to his county regional district, several counties away, or does he go to his federal office there? And he said, they always go to the federal agents because they're closer. So you see, that's how that they further removed. Well, this 4-page document here that this gentleman that was on the board in Little Rock that I told you was not happy and turned us away from having Miss Franks come from Wyoming. He's the one who said, he said, Connie, I'll tell you something. He said, after they, you know, I don't think he used the word rude, but he said, after they turned you down, after inviting you there and then, you know, doing a flip-flop on having you make this presentation, he said, I went to the director and asked him, because the director had approached him before and said, where does this put, the director had tried to convince him to lead his county office to agree to this combination of conservation districts. You know, they were just beginning to start push this program. And so this man on that board that day went back to the director and said, now that this Wyoming plan is being circulated and talked about, I said, where does that put this other program that you were wanting to promote? And he said, well, it kind of puts it on the back burner for now. Well, when this man told me that, I knew immediately that I wanted to see that document, because I knew. And that's what, if you will get this, we will leave a copy of it with you to distribute also. That is what's happening. Either Arkansas is going to get on board and get things righted with this Wyoming example, or we're going to be led down this path that Nebraska has already gone. So that's what we're circulating among elected officials and so on and so forth now, but it takes lots of people doing it. But I assure you, most of our elected officials, when they see these things going on, they don't like it, but they don't have time to investigate it. It takes the people, we must be diligent and be responsible to make sure our elected officials know what's going on and show them the truth. Study these things and get to an understanding of it yourself, and then contact the people that you need who can make a difference. And it's good to do it with petitions, with, you know, I have a few down here on these things on this step where I have some handouts for you. I'm going to be asking you tonight to sign some things for me that will just help. We'll be getting it to two different particular things. This hearing that's going on in Little Rock, the time limit for that is almost up. So if you would support what I have suggested tonight in getting our conservation districts re-strengthened and to have the power over the bureaucratic agencies as it should be, then I would like you to sign that. All you'll be doing is saying that you agree with my comments and that what I want to happen. So you can read over it. I urge you to read it before you sign it. Make sure you agree with it. But that's very important, because right now is the opportunity to get that dealt with. And so that's why I brought this tonight, to have you sign these if you'd like. Another thing has to do with the Freedom of Information booklet, if you will just sign that. You can take it and mail it yourself, or just sign it and I'll mail it for you, however you would like to do. Okay, I'm going to begin to wind down. I want to hear questions from you, and I'm sure I've skipped a lot of things I wanted today, so I'm going to kind of be looking over my notes. And you can be thinking of some questions that you would like to ask. Remember, what's basically behind the watershed districts and the watershed groups, these ecoregion agendas, is basically what will eventually happen is the neutralizing, the dissolving of our traditional county and state boundaries as lines are drawn with these ecoregions. And bioregional councils will be our government from that point. One of these things that it says on this map that was sent to me, I can't read that far away. Anyway, I can remember it. You can look at them more closely. But it says the basis, the approach used to compile that map, and understand this, there's a whole list of authors right here in this section of who put this together. And most of them were out of state. And they drew these ecoregion boundary lines. And that's what different rules and regulations will be based upon. But it wasn't mostly people from Arkansas, only one gentleman actually. And he was, interestingly, he was one of the men that was one of the main promoters of the United Nations Biosphere Reserve back in '96. Okay, now his name appears on this. And that's why I'm saying it's still the same thing, just under a different name. But it says the approach used to make this map was based on a thing called potential natural vegetation, which means vegetation that would exist if man were removed from the scene. Okay, they say it in black and white with our tax dollars. You put this together, and you see this row of logos here. I know you can't see from there, but you can look closer later. There's 5 federal agencies, and there are 8 Arkansas agencies here that all work together to pay for this. And our tax dollars paid for the 'putting together of that. One real interesting thing is there's a I had FOI'd almost all of these agencies. I dealt with them over the years that I've been working on this, and here was one I've never heard of before. So I started calling the governor's office, the legislative bureau, the attorney general's office, secretary of state's office. I called all these people and said, where is this agency? What is it? I don't know. Guess what? None of them knew anything about it either. I finally found it, and look, it's on the same footing with all of these other federal and state agencies. It's called the Multi-Agency Wetland Planning Team, okay? Guess how I finally found out who and where it was? I had to call somebody in Corvallis, Oregon, okay? The people who had put the map together. And here this is, and they finally told me where this agency is. It is located within the Game and Fish, what I call compound. If you've ever been there, it's just a big complex of buildings that they have there. Well, this secret agency that no one in the state of Arkansas government knew anything about that was even existing, that's where that exists. And the man in Oregon was able to tell me who exactly was the director of it and so on and so forth. We went there and personally inspected their files, and they weren't happy about that. We also revealed to the state legislature my understanding, and this is, remember, I'm not professional on things like this at all, but basically what this agency does in my analysis of it is they are sort of channeling a lot of the money things that are happening in all these programs. My guess is that they're channeling the funds for it through this agency that the other agencies don't want to handle, okay, because it might not be quite as popular. That's just my explanation of it, okay? That's my understanding of it. You can ask them if they'd like to disagree with that. But anyway, this is the map that I got originally that says the removal of man from the scene. When I presented that to the Pollution Control and Ecology Commission, who has oversight of the DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, you know, they looked at it and I suppose asked a few questions, and that was in September or October of a couple of years ago, or a year ago, I guess it's been. Then I also had an appointment with one of the legislative subcommittees that I was going to be presenting this information as well as some other stuff to a month later. What was so interesting, that day when we got to the legislative subcommittee, the agency was there in full force to explain away this map. And later one of them came to me and said, are you sure you've got the latest version of this map? And I said, well, I don't know. This is the one that I just got, and it's fairly recently published. And he said, let me have your address. Well, I got this in the mail a few days from him. And I have searched that map carefully, all of that. And the only thing they have changed in it is the wording of that man removed from the scene. Of course, they tried to explain it away. They didn't really do a very good job. All they said on this one, it says, when human influence has ended. So I guess they thought that was a good change. But that's what's going on in our agencies. There's some more things on it that I'm not going to take the time to mention. What I did find out from the people in Oregon is that it says on there that this statement about removing man from the scene was based on a 1964 map. And so he was the one who told me how to get a copy of that. And that's that big one over there, the entire country. All of those swirly lines are pictures with all the keys down there, the different colors. It's vegetation that will regrow after. Okay, this manual, this is where I got it from, okay, from the state library system, and it's kind of alarming to read. You know, they talk about being burned, the countryside and things being burned, and there won't be any firemen here to put the fires out, and this also is paid for with our tax dollars. There's some names in it that you would recognize if you see that back in 1964, some pretty prominent names associated with this American Geographical Society, who is behind. So, you know, people say that's ludicrous, those kinds of things are not happening. But here's the proof, okay? This came from the state library system. I eventually bought it from them, and that's why I still have that. But this map says that the approach used to make this map of Arkansas was based on this 1964 map, which has to do with the removal of man from the scene. It says it in black and white. So they at first said, that's not what that means, you know, but then they took the pains to change it, or at least change it a little bit, the wording, so why did they bother to change it? That's not what it means. But okay, to get a constitution from the state of Arkansas, you call the Secretary of State's office, and that is 501-682-1010. to get a Freedom of Information handbook, you call the Attorney General's office. And I wrote the number down, but I'm not sure where I've got it now. They have an 800 number. I'm not sure.
I have just the regular Attorney General.
Okay, give me that then.
It is 682-2007.
Okay, 682-2007, and again, that's 501. 682-2007. That's the Attorney General's office. I'm sorry, I have the 800 number here somewhere, but it doesn't surface right now. Okay, here's the 800 number. I found it. 1-800-482-8982. Be sure and get a Freedom of Information handbook and study it. It's very important to you in all the facts that you find. The Secretary of State is 501-682-1010. One other thing I would like to mention that I didn't before, do you have that word you could put up on the screen here? I wanted to see if any of you have ever heard of, seen this word before. It's spelled USUFRUCT. Sometimes it has ION or AL. Okay, has anyone ever heard that word or know what it means?
I can't even see it.
Okay, raise it up, Mary, thank you. Usufructure. Usufructure, okay? The basis of the word is use and fructure. Fructure means fruitful. That's where that word comes from. To use and enjoy is basically the meaning of it. But what it comes from, and you see, okay, that'll be fine, thank you. This big book, okay, the Global Biodiversity Assessment. Back when Clinton was governor, there was a biodiversity treaty before the U.S. Senate, and it was within hours of being passed. They had enough votes for it, and yet there were some gentlemen up in Maine, the state of Maine, who had worked for the government in years past and knew what was behind this biodiversity treaty that the United States Senate was fixing to enter into. And they worked hard through their senators to try to stop it, but to no avail. However, they had been in Switzerland or Sweden, I can't remember, and had seen this book that the people who were promoting that treaty were denying even existed. They took it upon themselves to fly there to, was it Switzerland or Sweden? Switzerland. And they smuggled this book out of that country, and they got it to the floor of the U.S. Senate literally hours before that was to be voted on. And because of their efforts, and I mean these are just common people like you and I, because of their efforts, the U.S. Senate then got angry because the people who were promoting that treaty were exposed as being liars, that this really did exist. And what this is a global plan to dissolve all national boundaries and just make one big global nice world government. But in this book, on page 903, that's the only place I have seen it in there, is this particular word, usufructure, okay? And what it basically means is that there will be the abolition of private property rights all over the world. That's the basis of what's behind it. And therefore, they were denying that that's the agenda, that anything else. Also, part of Agenda 21, the summit they had in Rio de Janeiro, and one of our presidents signed on to that. It all goes hand in hand. This information really does exist. But this particular word, what's so alarming about it now is that what it means is that it goes back to the ancient feudal system of lords and serfs, where the government owns all the land and the people are nothing more than tenants on their land. Like now, it's getting more and more, there's so many regulations, and we pay property taxes. If you don't pay your property taxes, you lose your land. All of this is all part of the same program, the same idea, the same philosophy, that you only get to, enjoy your land, okay? But you're not really the true owner of it. And that's where we're headed with all of these programs and things that are happening that we are fighting, even though we don't understand it. Okay, well, I had learned this years ago from this. A couple of years ago, that my husband was preaching in the St. Louis area, and we visited the Westward Expansion Museum there. We're underneath the arch there in St. Louis. It's a very nice museum. But as we were touring that museum, out in the center portion of that, there was a park service, what do you call them, the park ranger, park officials, was giving a lecture to some little school-aged children in the middle, and they had an easel set up there. And as I happened by it later, after the little children were gone, they had left that easel sitting there, and guess what word by this Department of Interior agent, Park Service agent, had been teaching those little children, school children. That was the word all across that easel. Well, most people don't even know that, but see, our tax dollars was teaching that to our school-aged children. I went immediately to the park superintendent and I said, what is an agent being paid with my tax dollars teaching this to our children for? And they didn't even know what it meant. They said the person who was taught, who had been teaching it, was now gone from the area. And I said, well, I gave them my name and address, and I said, I want an answer from the official, what do you call it, the park director or whatever of that particular. I said, I want an answer. You give them this question and this comment of mine, and I want an answer why that's being done. Well, I have right here in my book, I have an answer that they got, and they explained it away. That's not what they meant by it, they said, but anyway, that's just how it goes all along. But recently then, Mary and her husband were touring up in Oregon, was it, or something?
Oh, where this is from? This is from Spokane, Washington.
Spokane, Washington. They had gone on a train trip up there, and she just picks up newspapers wherever she goes. And this was after the hurricanes went through New Orleans. And guess what now that is being considered in New Orleans, how to deal with all the problems they've got there. They are resurrecting this archaic term, they said, and it is usufruction. Right there, can you see it? So this has now come to the forefront, even as making headline news in our nation, that this actual philosophy is being considered how to remedy a situation down there. What it would mean is, and it tells you all in the rest of the article, the government would own all the land and the people would basically be tenants. I don't know if we have any extra copies of that particular article. But see, this is where this first originated, from this particular book that our U.S. Senate at the last minute defeated that treaty. But you can, on page 903 of this, it describes that usufruction. So now we have seen it in two. I have proof of it here that it was being taught by our federal agents to school children, this usufruction philosophy, and now it's surfacing there. This is an agenda that is moving across our nation, and the fact that Arkansas is opposing these things, even though we don't understand what's behind it, we know that these kinds of things are going on. Article 7, Section 28 of our state constitution, several years ago, I saw that and I thought that is the answer, because it says counties have exclusive original jurisdiction in all matters that pertain to land, bridges, and all things that may concern us. Okay? I discussed this with this attorney friend of ours in Wyoming, Ms. Bella, several years ago, and I wrote up a declaration for a county to pass to be able to deal with these things. I sent it to her. She did a legal review for us, and she says that this, as far as she knows, that Arkansas is the only state in the nation that has this powerful provision in its state constitution. Therefore, we have an opportunity. I've been sharing this with a number of people, and of course, the powers that be do not want to agree with that whatsoever. But it further underscores the need to reestablish our county conservation districts and to make local management of our watersheds and of our non-point source pollution with all of these matters. We have it in our Constitution. We have an opportunity that anyone else in the nation does not have. But it takes, getting this information out and getting legal professionals to do that. We already have a legal review done by this attorney out of state on this matter, but we need to get attorneys here who are property friendly. I mean, we all have access to different people, but be looking for people like that and educating them. It takes people like you to bring this kind of information to people. It's something that can be done, and don't ever get discouraged. I want to conclude what I'm saying before I begin taking questions by saying this. Hitler's philosophy many years ago was, if you tell a lie often enough, long enough, and loud enough, the people will believe. And we see how that has happened across the world and in our nation and our state. And many of these things that are happening and coming in on us from every angle, sometimes we just feel overwhelmed by it. But it came to me many years ago when I just kept on. It just seemed like it was so useless to fight these battles sometimes, but it's not. There's more out there than you would believe. So it came to me, if we tell the truth often enough, long enough, and loud enough, the people will believe that as well. Plus, the truth will vindicate itself. So what we are having the benefit of here in Arkansas, many of the other states have already gone far down the road of this watershed approach and this bureaucratic thing, and they're already reaping bad results from it out in Oregon and western states especially. So we have an opportunity here. We've already got many bad examples of why we don't want these kinds of things coming in on us. And we have an opportunity to educate our elected officials as to what needs to be done. So I urge you to support, promote, distribute, get this information out about the Wyoming example as a way to do conservation, protection, land management of our local watersheds. So I will be glad to take any questions now that you would like. Yes, sir?
I have 2 questions. Number 1, is anything and can anything be done to undo this Buffalo River fiasco?
I can't answer that directly. I don't know for sure. Many things. If the ERW, they have said long ago that the ERW designation was their reason for trying to enforce the water resource management plan that they were trying to implement after the biosphere thing fell through. So that's why I asked the governor several years ago, strike this thing off the books. That's what I have been saying and doing all this time. Now we have gotten it to the forefront of knowledge enough at this point that many people in powerful positions are saying, yes, we've got to do something with this ERW. That's what's going on right now in Van Buren. They're trying to modify it a little bit. It's laughable to me that they want to modify it. They're thinking that they can kind of compromise. These agencies will never compromise because they see it's going to tear down their whole house of cards if this ERW designation goes out the window. But, yes?
At the beginning of your presentation, you alluded to communist connection to the Communist Manifesto. Could you expound on that a little?
No, I really can't. I'm just, it was Karl Marx and the 3 planks of the communist.
What is the connection that you're making?
Okay, the abolition of property rights was one of the main tenets of communism. Okay, and that's why I'm saying the other 2 were the destruction of the family and free enterprise and industry. So those are the things that we see in this nation that are being so eroded and so affected. And I'm not saying, well, actually I am. That's the connection. That we know that we have enemies. Okay, here in her paper, great, that she's been getting out on page 23 of, which issue is it, Loretta?
It's in every issue.
It's in every issue she has.
Same spot.
The 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, okay? So if you'd like to read that, get one of these papers and you will understand more about that. But the fact that it is having that we are suffering on these particular issues in our nation and our state so much, I allow you, I'm just leaving it to you to draw your own conclusions on that. Yes, sir?
That goes back a long ways to the late 1800s by Karl Marx and Trotsky.
Yes, sir.
And it's the plan to undermine the free world.
The free nations of the world, that is correct. It's all you have to do is study history, much of which is not being taught very extensively anymore. And there's always been internationalists who want to control the entire world. And nations like ours get in the way of that. Yes, sir?
If they do away with the ERWs, is there any way that we can maintain the quality of some of these streams without designating them as an ERW? Like AAA, that could go back to AAA streams, or how would they do that to maintain those?
The most important way for streams to be maintained is for each county to determine how they want to maintain it. It should be up to each county, and then counties in a region get together and decide. Everything has to meet the fishable, swimmable standards according to the Clean Water Act. Okay, then. If the state or an area wants to maintain higher designations, but it should be the local people should make those decisions. Okay? That's what's wrong with this whole agenda The Kings River Watershed Partnership, for instance, of which I have joined because I have a stake in the Kings River. I own land there. The thing of it is, they want to do it with stakeholders. A stakeholder can be someone on the other side of the world who sees a picture of the Kings River and loves it and has such an aesthetic interest about this. They can send in their comments from around the world and say, look, I want this river protected and I want this and this done. Everybody, stakeholders means anybody. We try to get them to change it to inholders, are the ones who have the power to make the rules and regulations and come to these consensus agreements. They didn't like that at all because, see, that would tear down their game plan.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but see, that's the whole point. Yes, and if you've been listening to the hearings that's been going on with the ERW thing now in Van Buren, you hear one after another of these environmentalists get up and say, I went fishing on that when I was a child. I moved away and I came back and I cried when I saw what they had done. But see, what we can't forget is just because we have an interest in something that belongs to somebody else does not give us the power to go in and tell them what to do. Local people need to make these decisions. And yes, I mean, we want clean water. We want to protect our pristine waters. But the whole point of the Clean Water Act to begin with, and it makes it clear all the way throughout, these things have to maintain a balance between economic and social interest with environmental interest. And it's getting so far out of balance the other way, they are protecting things to the detriment of our economies and our social cultures. So, yes.
I would just like to say that in the definition of an ERW, it actually makes the private property owner whose land butts up to that extraordinary resource water responsible for the view shed. How many of you know what the view shed is? It's anything that you can see from the water. So
if they don't like what they see on your property, they can complain and go through their processes and require you to remove what's in their view shed. Yes.
What does, sounding stupid, I know, but what does ERW stand for?
Extraordinary Resource Water.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't make that clear enough. I think this man has a question first.
Can you speak to the whole area of how words are so powerful? At the meeting, I met you folks down there in Fayetteville. Several individuals explained the actual effect of what the ERW is doing in terms of people can no longer maintain their streams and how it's affecting the farmland. Can you go into that, talk about words?
Okay, they keep saying that the ERW designation itself will make no rules, it'll make no regulations. It's just a plaque on the wall. That's kind of what they say, that it's just an honor that has been put on these streams because they're so clean. However, what they don't tell you is, and they say that that's why they didn't have to do an economic impact study. But what I keep hammering away at them is saying, wait a minute, what about what is it going to require to maintain, to attain and maintain this level of designation they put on it? Because CERW is the highest level, and it actually means, when you study it in the Clean Water Act, in the Code of Federal Regulations, it means no degradation to the watershed. That's another thing. See, they did not really have the authority to put watershed in with that definition, but they did. So see, a watershed goes out miles from these rivers and streams. And your land and my land is in these watersheds of these ERWs. And one of the main things that they are really keying on and targeting right now is septic systems. But they say, okay, we're going to have to come to consensus on this and agree that, we've got to fix these septic systems. The point of it is, the laws are already on the books. They just need to be enforced in the right way. Yes, we want septic systems to, meet the necessary standards. It should be up to the county courts, the county courts to decide what they're going to allow in the way of septic systems. And they should be the ones to enforce the regulations. We don't need these volunteer groups out there coming up with these consensus ideas and goals and agreements to enforce upon everybody in the watershed. In this flow chart that I have here, that is exactly what we want them to do. When there's a problem somewhere, it needs to be dealt with site specifically. If there is someone who is polluting an area that is seeping into a stream or a river, then it needs to be dealt with on that. Just because one person is making a pollution problem, they shouldn't pass a rule that everybody in the whole entire watershed has to do whatever that person has to do. And they're trying to pass blanket rules and regulations to deal with everybody rather than working on site-specific problems. And that's what the Wyoming plan would cause to happen. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a fishing person, and I have probably fished every ERW in the state. Compare that to Crooked Creek. I like ERWs because what they did to Crooked Creek is sinful, and it wasn't protected. It was left off the list. And you can't even get into Crooked Creek now because the owners locked it down, even though the waters of the state belong to the people of the state, not the ground, just the waters.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was listening to one thing. Now, the last thing you said, the water beds belong
The beds belong to the owners.
That's right.
But the water belongs to the people.
To the state, right.
The residents of the state of
But see,
Arkansas.
the gravel mining issue was the situation there
It ruined it, and it wasn't a protected stream, and the property owner went in and gravel mined, as if we didn't have any gravel in Arkansas.
Okay, but then, see, in other ERW streams where they have not allowed the gravel removal, now they are being so congested with gravel that they have really messed up the streams. Kings River is one of them, and
You
several.
still get 18-inch smallmouth out of Kings River, honey.
Yes, at this point you can, but there are a number of problems with that. The ERW designation, we are not saying that you don't need to regulate things to a degree. In Crooked Creek, that's exactly, I wasn't there when that happened years ago, but I have heard other people say as well that it is horrible what they did to that particular creek because they overdid it. But the point of it is, like it said in this newspaper article, the Washington County judge, it's not that we don't want our waters protected, it's how you go about it. If we allow these other methods to come in that circumvent the local people from being able to do it, then we're all going to be the losers. We've got to get it restored like it should be. It's got to be, the rules and regulations have got to come through our locally elected officials. We've got to be able to have voluntary management of these of the streams and water beds and watersheds, if you will. But it's how you go about it. And there have been abuses of laws, from time to time throughout different areas. But the people of the Crooked Creek area, I applaud them for stopping it because by that time they understood the dangers of the ERW. And I understand that they're still, you hear two different stories on the Crooked Creek. Some people say it's still renowned around the world, that people are still coming there on certain portions of it. But then there are certain portions of it that have been desecrated and are having to recover. But the ERW designation is not the way to do it. We've got to get it established how we're going to maintain and to bring about how we're going to govern ourselves. But there is, the courts are there. The court system is there. When there is a problem somewhere, we're supposed to take it to the court and let that settle it on a local level. That's just the way it is. The ERW, the way it is set up, is taking away the power of the local people to manage their own properties and to do it what I call the constitutional process. That has stood for many years in this nation. It's what made us the greatest nation on earth, is the Constitution that we have and our adherence to that, letting the people be the government. But what is happening is this usurpation of our bureaucratic agencies taking over our elected agencies process. And I hope I helped you a little bit there, but it bothers me when you say you like ERWs. I urge you to really study the whole issue from beginning to end. It sounds good, like it has helped some of the others, but remember, these streams were already pristine when they put that designation on them. The people had already taken care of it on these others. And it has not, what it is causing now is causing landowners grief that they cannot go ahead and continue to farm their lands and do various things because of the increasing regulations, especially on nutrient management and things like that. But we need to be able to monitor those things and to govern ourselves in those matters. And where a local whole county can work together and the area counties can get together on their own river and stream and make the rules themselves as to how pristine they want to keep it. Then that can take care of individual matters where they are abusing it in like one or two little areas like they did on Crooked Creek. I hope that helps. Yes, sir?
I've noticed that over the years, the creek will wander all over the bottom of the valley if you don't keep the buildup of gravel down. If you don't keep it directed, it'll wander all over the place. So if you got a valley that's 600 feet wide, and that's a landmark, it's going to be moving. It could move 600 feet in 20 years or something. If it piles up with gravel here, it's going to find another way around. And I think that's where you do need to remove some gravel sometimes to keep it where it's supposed to be.
Moderation in all things.
But not to just take everything out. You don't want to do that either.
That's so important to do that, because on the gravel removing all things need to be done decently and in order, and that was, okay, yes, sir?
Yes, appears to be all these laws, like the biosphere thing and all those things, were international law. And I can't understand how the international law seeps into our system through the bureaucracies rather than our elected officials. And how does it do that? I just can't imagine how they can get those kind of laws to go through the bureaucracy. And these are regulations, they're not laws.
Right.
It's like this animal ID thing. It's a regulation. It's not a law. It hasn't been passed by the Senate or the Congress.
It started out as a policy, and it just creeps up. And see that, and they put it before a subcommittee, and many times get a rubber stamp approval to go on. But if we start investigating it and taking it back to the source and say, where is your authority? And find out from there on all of these things. But I mean, there's so many myriads of them. It's very difficult to do, but it was designed for you to not understand it, to not know. That's just the strategy that's been being done through these huge nonprofit foundations. They are the ones really behind the scenes. They're the ones that put up the money, and they have international interests. That's where their money.
That's where the international law comes from.
Right, and there's very alarming things in lots of arenas. I read an article not long ago about how recently in major decisions in the Supreme Court and other circuit courts across the nation, they actually allude to international law in these things. And it's very frightening what is happening.
Well, it said, I think there's been a precedence ever since the country was started that no international law or treaty can supersede the Constitution of the United States. So if that is true, then all this is illegal.
Exactly.
What they're doing with the watershed, that is illegal.
Exactly.
What they're doing with the Animal ID Act, that's illegal.
It's unlawful. Mary, if you put up there that thing from the from the Declaration of Independence, if you could find that, and then also that law of the land. If you could come up with both of those while we're talking. Yes, Christine.
I was going to say, one of the other words they use all the time is partnering. Partnership. Yes. That's a word you have to watch out for.
Public-private partnerships.
Partner with somebody.
That's the thing in educational circles, in medical circles, in religious circles now. You will hear that anytime you read it in a newspaper article or hear it, a public-private partnership or a partnership here or there. You know then that it's part of this Agenda 21, this whole global agenda. That's what it is. So, and then those are the ones, these public-private partners, that are getting together and getting federal dollars brought in so that the federal government can come in directly, and we will not have the protection of our state and local governments to protect us from that. Yes, Mr. Cosmic.
Pertaining to these conservation district boards, I have never heard of those things around here, period, until you mentioned it. Number one, how do they establish a voter list? I've never seen a voter list.
It's landowners, according to the statute passed in 1937 here in Arkansas, and I've got the whole thing, I've got a whole file on this. They set up how it was to be done. And like I said, I don't know if Benton County had an election this year or not. They just post the notices about it in just, places where people never see or never know what it is. They don't tell people that only landowners can vote. You just don't hear about it. You don't know it. That's why 20,000 landowners, only 89 vote in one county, and only 20 in her county that voted that ever even found out about it. So it's just something that's not being known. It's got to be remade known.
I've never seen an advertisement for one of these elections. Never.
I think they put it on a little flyer. I asked this time, and they said in Boone County they did it this year, but she said that most of them don't have opponents. This is the same people run over and over again. And so They just barely even make mention of it. They only meet the letter of the law. They don't meet the spirit and intent of the law, and they just post it just as lightly and little as they can.
Now, where should I go to look to find one of these conservation district?
To your NRCS office.
NRCS office.
Go there and say, who are my county agents? When was our last election for these county agents? When will it be again? Start getting acquainted with them. Go to them individually. Your county, get a list of them. They'll have their names, their phone numbers. There should be 5 of them. It's interesting. Each county elects 3, and then the director of the agency, Soil and Water, appoints 2. Okay? But he cannot appoint 2 unless the 3 elected ones agree with those 2 appointed ones. Okay? So it's still, the process is recoverable. Okay? I'm sorry, I'm missing hands. I'll start over here.
My name's John Henley. I'm with the Morning News, and I have a couple of questions. I've heard from the beginning you said you keep referring to they want to usurp the county and local authorities and stuff. Who exactly are you talking about? The executive branches under the governor, or are you talking about federal agencies?
I'm talking about the nonprofit watershed groups and districts, okay, and the people behind them. Also,
The Audubon Society.
Yes, the Audubon Society is the one who wrote your plan here, the watershed plan for the Beaver Lake District, is my understanding, is what I've been told. And I've gotten a copy of it from the agency down there, but I've not had time to read it to look at it yet.
Okay, and do you know why they're doing this? I mean, have you been able to find out? You mentioned you've FOI'd several things. Or do you have any idea of why they're trying to do this? Or what their intent is?
Yes, because they want to redraw lines of government. They want to govern our land on the basis of water. It's not about water, clean water, and water quality. It's about land control. That's where the watershed thing comes in, the watershed word. And they don't have the power to do this had our state agency not volunteered to do this. And I'm talking about the federal agency, EPA, because EPA is the one with the federal NRCS group. They got together with this watershed policy and sold it to the states, basically. And that eventually will give the federal agency more power and control, the power and control, actually, of our local watersheds.
Okay, how do you think this fits in with the fact that in Arkansas and other states that have a personal property tax, some people claim that we don't own our property outright anyway? Because if you don't pay your property taxes, the state will come and seize it. Do you think that's wrapped up in this as well? Or is it even a part of it?
Not directly, but so it is a point, because, the point that you just said, people make about the, if you fail to pay your property tax and you lose it anyway, so you're really not the owner of it. I've heard that argument a lot of times. It makes sense to me, but that's kind of coming from a whole different perspective than this watershed authority. The big battle is, when all of this comes down, who is going to have the authority to govern the land in our watersheds? And they are coming through the ERW designation, because it's the only designation that includes watershed in its definition. And I keep contending that was unauthorized when it was put in there to begin with. And we have contended that before the Pollution Control and Ecology Commission for several years now. And last year, we were successful enough that the commission voted to modify that definition somewhat. And they actually added language to it, saying that it was not the intent of the agency to control the watershed in the way that we were saying it was possible to do. And the entire commission voted, and by one vote it passed to include that clarifying language. However, when the agency then printed up the new Regulation Number 2 booklet, which has the governing power of that, guess what? They left it out. And it went through the whole EPA approval and everything. After the commission had voted to do that, they still left it out. So we brought that to their attention again. We'll see what they do with it. Yes, sir?
There's no saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And you alluded to the strings that are attached with federal grant money.
Yes.
And the state has, in a lot of respects, become addicted to it. We're getting private groups are getting awfully good at obtaining federal grant money. We've heard in a couple of town hall meetings recently and in the press that the Benton County administration has applied for $300,000 to do flyovers to do thermal imaging of the lake. Thank you.
Excuse me just a minute. Sir, from the Morning News, can I
Yes,
have your
ma'am.
card before you leave?
I don't have one on me. Let me leave my name and email
Would you
address for you.
please? Phone number, I prefer. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Anyway, we've heard that they have applied for federal grant money, EPA grant money, to do thermal imaging of Beaver Lake. In your experience, what kind of strings are going to be attached to that money for Benton County? And I hope the paper doesn't leave before you answer that.
I can assure you, in my assessment of the whole thing is that it won't be good for the property owners, okay? How they use it, and I spoke with the gentleman earlier, and I have some ideas as to how you might oppose that, but I'm not going to go ahead and make that public at this point. You guys are creative. You'll be able to come up with some good ways to oppose that. It's just more federal dollars, and to deal with these things that are coming through these nonprofit groups. And I and for county quorum courts need to set up some kind of oversight committees to monitor every bit of federal money that comes into an area. So put that in your paper if you like. Okay, that is a really important, needful thing. If county quorum courts would set up oversight committees to assess every kind of grant that is written for that area, and then let the quorum courts decide whether or not that is going to be beneficial or detrimental to the county.
Okay, with all respect, you haven't answered my question, though.
I'm sure I haven't.
Historically, what you have encountered, what are we looking at in terms of what kind of, what's the EPA going to get in return? What are they going to be looking for from the county? We need to understand
Ability to intrude at the local level without going directly through our elected officials. Grants have agendas. I have information I'd be happy to share with you to give a better, more detailed answer than I am personally able to give to you. But for other people who have studied this and who have much more expertise in these matters than I do, have good information about that. I have one particular article. In fact, it is titled that Grants Have Agendas. And so I would be happy to share that with you for a more complete answer. I'm sorry I can't give you a direct answer. I know what you're fishing for. I read in a local newspaper here years ago, with any of this federal money, there are miles of string attached. And it's so complex, there is no single answer for any one particular grant that comes into an area. But in this article that she just played a while ago, and there were some of those floating around, it was an article out of the Democrat Gazette saying that Arkansas ranks 12th in the nation for getting more federal dollars than it actually pays. And in my opinion, that is a dangerous thing to be happening, and we need to wean ourselves off federal dollars. And we need to not do more than we do.
That's on use of record.
Thank you, Mr. Morning.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. I know you have to be exhausted. I mean, my head just swimming with all this stuff you've told me.
Thank you.
But based on my experience, unless someone feels like whatever's happening is going to impact them personally, they tend to be very, divorced, isolated from it, and not paying attention. It's like, well, if it doesn't affect me, it's no big deal. So when you talk about watershed ordinances and so forth, what do you tell people if they don't live around the lake? Because that's the perception, well, I don't live around the lake, so it doesn't affect me.
Because these things are not, they only start around the lake, and their plan is they just keep moving the lines, okay? If you look at any of you can go online, from what I'm told, and look under biosphere reserves and watershed boundaries and things like that, and they start with core management areas, then they have buffer zones, and then managed areas, and so on and so forth, and it just keeps extending the lines. And I mean, you can just look in that newspaper article that was up there a while ago, it says here, if Benton County approves the ordinance, it will serve as a starting draft of what the other counties will be asked to consider. One man said the goal is to have ordinances being reviewed and possibly approved in all of our counties by the middle of next year. They're also in that other thing that was up there a while ago about this summit that was happened in Eureka Springs first, and then it was in Branson just not long after that. They want to have legislation prepared by June of this year to go forward in the next one. So what we as property rights activists have to do is to get our form of legislation prepared also and submitted and entered to counter that. And just to be on hand and to get our legislators educated as to what's going on. And you just have to read and read and read and understand all this. And I'm just supplying you with, the things that I have learned. And again, I am not a professional at any of this. I have just dug it out and just learned little bits here and there, piece by piece. And I don't always have immediate answers, but I can tell you, when you work at it long enough and you stay with it, it's not, they have purposely, and I always say, well, who's they? It's the agents and people working through our bureaucracies who are designing these kinds of things and just bringing them in so subtly. And they never, in one of their own documents, they have a term they call iterative process. That's what they use to accomplish their goals. And it's described as, they just keep, if you look it up in the dictionary, iterative just means keep going around, and each time the circle gets a little bit wider. And even though they may fail to accomplish something one time, they just come around again. And people get weary and tired and go away and quit fighting it. So they keep doing that, and that's why, it's just, the battles that we fight never end. But they don't like us, and I assure you, I will apologize for you now. They will use me to make you guys look bad in the morning news tomorrow. That's what that guy was up to. So, but don't let it discourage you, because I have had my picture in the Democrat Gazette saying that, well, is there still a newspaper reporter here that you know of? Okay, then.
They did a hit piece on our newspapers, so we're
okay. But they started putting words in our mouth when we were working on that biosphere reserve thing. They started saying that they reported things that we never said whatsoever. That we were seeing black helicopters and helmets, UN helmets, and I mean, just made these most ludicrous things and just made these ludicrous accusations in the newspaper. But see, I just didn't go away. I didn't care. Let them say what they want. Just say this. Write a letter to the editor and say this. And I did this one time. Obviously, we have struck a nerve. Okay. So when they come at you like that, don't fall back. Just keep going and just smile at them. Yes, sir, Mr. Cossel.
I think it'd be very much worthwhile if the newspapers here had the gumption to do so. They would print the fact that there were no quorum court members present at this meeting tonight. They all received a personal invitation. And that to me tells you what type of quorum court organization we have locally here. We don't show them at a meeting like this.
It does, but I assure you, they want to be disassociated with this kind of information. I assure you, I have not had good results but I should mention with newspapers, personally. They will do anything to malign the people who tell the truth. You talk to, yes, Mrs. Williams?
not us.
I know, not you, okay. But they are an independent newspaper. I'm talking about the major news media, okay? However, what's real interesting, and I wish I had thought of this when that Mr. O'Collin tell us, okay, in the Carroll County Spring Progress edition of their newspaper just recently, when we introduced this Wyoming plan in that quorum court over there, they came out of the woodwork to oppose it. The NRCS agents did, and other people of this Kings River Watershed group. And, we just presented it there just to get it in the news anyway. We knew they'd just stomp on us and rump on us and everything, but that's okay. Just go right ahead and just keep doing their tactics. Just keep on coming back and coming back. And, they get so frightened, it gets in the news and it gets attention, and that's what you want. But anyway, so we hadn't been over there working in that county on these issues for quite some time. We had gotten what we wanted, basically. It was attention to it to begin with. And then just in this past month, they do the Carroll County News over there does a spring edition where they kind of recap the whole year. And in this particular article, they do a whole section on the Wyoming plan. And it thrilled me when I read what they're saying. It makes me know we're being effective, and there's a lot of people looking at this. Because this guy, I had talked with him, this newspaper reporter, he was opposing it big time, and he was trying to really promote the other side. But he is even acknowledging a number of good things in this. Let's see, it says, in some quarters, the Kings River group is suspect because it includes members who do not own property in the watershed. You know, we really wanted to make that. And so here they're putting it in, that that's the truth. People that are not in the watershed are part of this partnership that's making rules for us to have to live by. And because the watershed planner, Shauna Miller, her salary comes from EPA, okay? See, when they first set up that watershed group over there at Kings River, I actually have it. I got it by Freedom of Information documents where they had a professor come from the university and say, they printed in the newspaper and it's in their minutes saying that EPA had just notified them that Kings River was going to be put on the impaired list. Well, as a result of his, this is my words, a lie, okay, because that was not true, and I got the documentation to prove that is not true. EPA acknowledged to me, so did DEQ, that was never happened, that they never received notification that it was going to be put on the impaired list. But it had the effect of him telling those people that they all got on board, and they got some very influential people there to go ahead and agree to form this group for the purpose of, in their own words, of this leader, this Shauna Miller, who wrote the plan, who's writing the plan, we've got to protect ourselves from EPA. She said, if we don't set up this group and start governing ourselves and making ourselves agree to rules and regs, then EPA is going to come in and do it for us and scare people to death. That's been their tactic for all these years. EPA cannot do it unless the state agencies or the local people volunteer to let them do it, okay, by signing on to all these things. Okay, well, when I went to that first meeting, and another gentleman there, we raised our hand the first thing after she gave this little speech, and this other gentleman was there said, may I ask who pays your salary? Because she just got through saying, we've got to protect ourselves from EPA, we've got to form this group. Well, she gave 5 different answers before she finally gave the final answer. EPA pays her salary. So you see, that's EPA, the federal agencies, and the nonprofit groups are behind these watershed groups and these watershed districts. They pay these people to write the plans, okay, that we're all supposed to have to agree to. So at this point, this newspaper article, I rejoice to see that they still don't have the plan written. They had planned to have it done by January of this year. But we keep on holding their feet to the fire, and we intend to continue, because we don't want this nonprofit group, volunteer group, who has all these radical environmental agendas behind them. We don't want them writing a plan. We want our local conservation districts deciding and determining these matters. And it can be done if we get the Wyoming example implemented in this state. And it's already, our conservation district boards are already there. They've just been pushed out of the picture. We've got to push them back into the picture. And that's the best thing you can do right now to help yourself and the whole state, is to get that information out there. Yes, sir?
Just back to what Bob was talking about a while ago, who to contact on your statement about so many thousand landowners and only 85 voted. What is the definition of a landowner in that circumstance?
A landowner is anybody who has a deed, a title deed to land, whether it's a city lot or
city lot. Okay.
That's my understanding. Yes, whether it's a city lot or a large
Because the county used to send out notifications about voting on certain county, I don't know what you'd call it, agendas, to people that own acreage.
That may be what you said that used to happen in this county?
Yes.
Okay, well,
but I don't know if they sent it out to other people that just own a piece of land that their house was on. But I know they sent it out to people that own acreage for different projects that they had in mind. Well, that's why I was wondering what your definition of
a
landowner and where there's so many thousand landowners.
Well, I was told by a conservation district officer that anybody who owns any portion of land is qualified to vote in these elections. But I really believe that, over the past 10 to 20 years, that information has just been being so quietly pushed aside, and that's why nobody today even knows they exist.
That's what I mean.
Can I make a fascinating point about that? Down at the Quorum Court in Washington County, we've been fighting the PAR Task Force, Protecting the Agricultural Rural Areas Task Force. One of the JPs down there recommended exactly what y'all are talking about. If we're talking about protecting farmland, how can we set it up so that the county residents out there in rural areas are the only ones that vote? The county attorney said, no, that's not legal. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. But yet there it is. So I think the information...
What you need to do is ask that county attorney, say, show me why we can't do it. Always make them show it to you. Say, where's your authority? Where's the citation for what you're saying? Why can't it be done? Prove it to me. Yes.
The morning news guy that said something about property tax. It's a privilege to pay property tax because that educates the children. That keeps the family together. But it's how they spend it we've got to watch out for. The people who wrote the deal about the property tax came from a place where 10% of people own 90% of land. And 90% of people couldn't get educated because of their money.
Well, I know that other states that don't have property tax and they still get their children educated all right. I don't know. I'm not good on that argument, okay, but I've heard several good ones about it. And there may be someone in here who can answer that better than I can. But
then that's the way I understood it, was that property tax was supposed to be for schools.
yes, well, I know that it is. I'm sure it is used for some good things, but taxation is a very difficult subject, and we should. I'm of the firm belief that certain things should and should not be taxed. Okay, but I'm not qualified enough to talk on the property tax issue. But from what I have read before, that I think there's better ways to do it.
In this county, 10% of the property is owned by farmers. 90% now because we're growing so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it was the farmers that when the original zoning law was proposed, the farmers and the Farm Bureau didn't like it. So we didn't get a zoning law. And because we don't have a zoning law, we're going to have condos.
That's a complicated subject. I don't fully understand, but just because somebody did or didn't do it doesn't mean that they were right or anything. But these are issues that you've got to study out and understand. And what my point is, that what we always have to maintain is make sure that we're going through the constitutional process of how to do these. And I know that the zoning ordinances and things like that fit very much into these global agendas. And I don't know, anytime you have the explosive development that is occurring in this area, there's a number of different ways to address it and to work on it, but it must be the local people through their local courts. And Mary just put up a note there that something I had missed. County land use plans. Okay, that's the provision in government for counties to see. The federal laws themselves say that these agencies, federal or state, cannot come into your county without and do things, develop things, without the approval, the notification to your local officials and to the knowledge of the public. They have to live by rules too. But counties must develop their own county land use plans. And that's been, Madison County at this point is the only one that currently has it. Fulton County is very near to having it. They're in their process of getting it done, thanks to Mary Rivera. But believe me, the federal agents do not want the counties to take advantage of this provision in the law that gives them the say in their local matters. Getting your counties, quorum courts, to put together a county land use plan deals with those kinds of things right there. And that way the rules and regulars set down how it's going to be done. And developing a county land use plan is critical. Mary, would you speak to that?
Well, there are two different kinds of land use planning. The kind of land use planning that you want is the kind that complies with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act. And it is a very specialized kind of document. So if you want some more information about it, if you ask me, give me your name and address, and I can send you information on it. But it takes a while, and it has to be done by the citizens. It's not something that's done by the quorum court. The citizens are appointed by your quorum court to put together a land plan. And you study the culture, economy, and I never can remember the third one. Culture, economy, and customs, right? And identify them. And
didn't you bring the piece of paper?
Yes, I did.
Okay, she's got a handout on that, so be sure and take her handout on that and understand that, and especially, ma'am, I think that you would enjoy reading that. Okay, it's time. Okay, we're going to have to hurry because we have to be out here by 10, so, yes.
You were talking about a county land use ordinance. Our county is trying to do a land use ordinance. They've kind of got one drawn up.
Okay,
but
but
it also includes wording about the watershed ordinance.
Oh, yeah.
It's an ordinance that there's not just there's the watershed, there's land use, there's the zoning, there's the what's the other one?
The kind that NEPA requires and not have any zoning to it.
Yes,
no
this is what Benton County's trying to do now.
Right.
They've got watershed, nuisance, land use, zoning, anyway. And in each of these ordinances, which are very poorly written and very open-ended, all four of these ordinances, I think there were 5, all cover the same issues in each one. So if one fails, another one passes, they've still got it. So these are.
Yeah, you can have one or the other kind of land use plan.
Well, I prefer one that's actually written well and that is spelled correctly and that is written obviously, that it at least indicates that it was written by people who have intelligence and education, rather than something which is thrown together. Well, if this one doesn't pass, we'll throw this one through. If that one doesn't pass, we'll throw this one through. Because all these separate issues are within each of these ordinances in some way.
Who put this together?
Well, we'd love to know. I would love to know.
That's a mystery.
It's a mystery, and you look at them all, and my gosh, my 16-year-old daughter could have done a better job.
You can use freedom of information to request that information.
We have on one issue and came up with, well, we're not really sure. We didn't really ask anybody, and we didn't really get any research from them.
You don't take something in verbally, you take it in writing.
Oh, it was in writing. It was submitted by, who asked for that freedom of information?
Which one?
The one, when was you?
Yeah.
To the quorum court, and what did you get back? It was submitted in writing.
I sent in writing pertaining to the watershed, and I requested copies of all documents, all commissional studies, all records of telephone calls, all emails, all that kind of good stuff, dealing with
Did you get
watershed. Yeah, I got it.
Got 0.
0. They didn't have anything, and then I actually got a letter back from one of the JPs that stated they did not have anything to study. Yet they were going to pass that. Had not 200 people showed up at that meeting that night, they would have passed it. And I've actually heard a comment from one of the quorum court members stating that we've had this ordinance in front of us long enough. We need to pass this thing, even if it's bad. If it's bad, we can come back later and fix it.
Well, it's good that you were there and that you managed to get it passed. But there's all kinds of forces working behind the scenes. So I just commend you folks for what you're doing, and you are effective. And no matter what they say in the paper tomorrow,
And it will
don't be discouraged. It won't be good.
It'll be interesting.
What newspaper was that guy from?
Morning News.
Morning News?
Yeah.
Connie, do you want to mention this?
Oh, yes, America's Godly Heritage. These are things, we don't really have time now, we're going to get out of it. These are things, if you could get this video, does it have the, yes, if you would write or call there, I urge you to get this video. Show it to your children, to yourselves. This is information that you need, okay, because it deals with all of these things. There's other things here, I have books as well. We the people, but you just have to get educated. The information is out there, and there is a grassroots movement all over this nation. The news media is not our friend. They malign us. They mostly just ignore us. But when they start putting you down, that means you're being more effective when they start maligning you. Okay, so just rejoice and let the Lord work it out. I'm the pastor's wife. I'd much rather be teaching the Bible. But I know the Bible says, Jesus himself said, "Occupy till I come." He was speaking of the things of earth that he has committed to our trust. And this nation has been raised up as the answer. I mean, it has been given the truth for so many generations. And it's no wonder we have enemies that fight against these things. So I urge you, Be faithful to what you're doing. It has eternal consequences. I do believe that. God bless you, and thank you for allowing me. And
I would like to ask everybody, we are, as she said, an independent press. We are all volunteers. Every penny goes towards printing and postage. We need you to subscribe and let your neighbors know so they can subscribe too. I don't want to see a paper left on that table when I leave here. Please, take them and hand them out.
Distribute, and you will enjoy them. It's a good paper.
Before you conclude, Connie, I'd just like everybody here to know that a few weeks ago when Connie was at the ADEQ meeting, I was there and I saw something that I wished I could say astounded me, but it didn't. As she asked questions to the ADEQ, and I believe the meeting was on Reg 2,
yes.
They continued to try to stifle her all the way up till toward the end of the meeting, and they simply refused to let her speak to any issue that was being described, for the reason that it was already on their record. Well, they were having meetings to inform the people, and she was dispensing information that the people didn't have, and they sure wasn't giving it to us. So with that, there was some members in the room that just basically shouted the AEDQ down, and she was able to finish her comments. But that's how far these people will go. They don't care about your rights. They don't care about anything about the way the law should be. They're just about getting it done however it can be done. So be afraid. Be very afraid. Take action, and if you don't, and get organized like this group has done, bring all the rest of the groups in the state together, then we won't be able to combat this. And I appreciate everything that you've done.
Thank you very much. And they're very nervous about the information. We've got enough information now that it's frightening to them, and that's why they are so determined to shut us up. But just keep telling the truth. That's the way to do it, and it will be rewarded.